American Spirits, episode 26. Once again, continuing our new series on H.L. Mencken's work, specifically his how do you pronounce this? Chrestomathy, which is a really cool word, which is his selection of his own best work as he believes it. So, yes, Mencken Spirits, oh my episode God. 26. Once again, continuing. My audio's our echo. Okay. Whew, sorry about that.
Capital podcasting, Charlie.
Yeah, I didn't realize my TV had the audio on. Anyway, welcome back by Ryan. How are you doing, Ryan?
Doing pretty well. How are you doing?
Oh, pretty tired, honestly, but that's all right. We've got some lively reading ahead of us, as is the case with Mencken. And then Mr. Quinn, how about yourself?
I am brimming with energy and ready to cast aspersions upon all that is.
Perfect. All right, I've manually lowered my volume to 0 rather than just relying on the mute feature, which could backfire. Okay, so to begin with, today we're doing essays on government is the topic. The first one we have, as you could, actually you can't see on screen. I will remember to hit the transition button. We're now transitioning to the part where you can actually see what's on the essay. So yeah, we've got section 8 here, government. We have some essays on government. The first essay titled "Its Inner Nature," and this was written actually all the way back in 1919. So that's pretty early. Some of the other essays we've been reading from Mencken have been from the 30s lately. Let me just double check we're live and everything's good. Yeah, it looks good. So who would like to read the first essay?
I'm happy to take it.
Nope, go ahead, Ryan.
All right. Yeah, and this one is very brief. It's a selection from a larger work. And Mencken writes, "All government, in its essence, is a conspiracy against the superior man. Its one permanent object is to oppress him and cripple him. If it be aristocratic in organization, then it seeks to protect the man who is superior only in law against the man who is superior in fact. If it be democratic, then it seeks to protect the man who is inferior in every way against both. One of its primary functions is to regiment men by force, to make them as much alike as possible and as dependent upon one another as possible, to search out and combat originality among them. All it can see in an original idea is potential change, and hence an invasion of its prerogatives. The most dangerous man to any government is the man who is able to think things out for himself, without regard to the prevailing superstitions and taboos. Almost inevitably, he comes to the conclusion that the government he lives under is dishonest, insane, and intolerable, and so, if he is romantic, he tries to change it. And even if he is not romantic personally, he is very apt to spread discontent among those who are. There is seldom, if ever, any evidence that the new government proposed would be any better than the old one. On the contrary, all the historical testimony runs the other way. Political revolutions do not often accomplish things of genuine value. Their one undoubted effect is simply to throw out one gang of thieves and put in another. After a revolution, of course, the successful revolutionists always try to convince doubters that they have achieved great things, and usually they hang any man who denies it. But that surely doesn't prove their case. In Russia, for many years, the plain people were taught that getting rid of the Tsar would make them all rich and happy. But now they have got rid of him, they are poorer and unhappier than ever before. Even the American colonies gained little by their revolt in 1776. For 25 years after the Revolution, they were in far worse condition as free states than they would have been as colonies. Their government was more expensive, more inefficient, more dishonest, and more tyrannical. It was only the gradual material progress of the country that saved them from starvation and collapse, and that material progress was due not to the virtues of their new government, but to the lavishness of nature. Under the British hoof, they would have got on just as well, and probably a great deal better. The ideal government of all reflective men, from Aristotle onwards, is one which lets the individual alone, one which barely escapes being no government at all. This ideal, I believe, will be realized in the world 20 or 30 centuries after I have passed from these scenes and taken up my public duties in hell.
Okay, yes, literally, he's predicting Warhammer 40K. Well,
Well, he's
I mean,
predicting the opposite of Warhammer 40K, but yeah.
well, he's predicting 30K, which is the cool part until we get to 40K. But anyway, in all seriousness, I mean, the takeaway here is basically that revolution in government tends to be treated as this panacea to all problems. We just need to replace the government with a new one, and you don't even have to take it all the way with replace the government. We can talk about, you just need to elect this party or this candidate, etc., and magically you fix all the problems and they go away. But really, that's not at all what happens. Very little actually changes simply by as he basically describes, swapping out one elite class for another, a circulation of elites, if you might call it that. This is, as we covered earlier in the series, this is basically what happened in the American Revolution, which was largely driven by particular economic interests of the elite class of men at the top, and that elite class basically stayed the same, except for certain loyalists being removed. But overall, throughout American and most of world history, with some counterexamples, revolutions do not provide a magical cure and often can be quite terrible. Of course, he's writing here on the Bolshevik Revolution, which was literally underway as he's writing this, basically at its point of completion. Now, I will make one caveat before ending my soliloquy here, that for the most part, we're looking at left-wing revolutions here. If you think about the history of revolution, particularly in the year 1919, there's not really a good outlook for this sort of thing.
Indeed. Sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, so the reason this is included is not to sort of delegitimize any sort of sovereign American state or anything like that. There would be plenty more to choose from if that was the reason for picking this. Rather, I think that there's something important here. At this point in time, 1919, 1920, this was considered a left-wing take, what Mencken is describing here, an extremely limited government, that revolutions will just replace one gang of thieves with another, that any sort of romantic worship of the government is a foolish waste of time. This was considered a left-wing ideal until roughly the New Deal era. Before the New Deal era, the American right, as you would see it, opposed to Mencken, was very progressive in nature. This would be a right wing characterized by Roosevelt and Taft. Not Taft at the point of writing this, but up until their break, I suppose. This was a right wing that tried to find good trusts and separate them from bad trusts, partner the government with them, intervene in Germany and Japan, regulate wages, contracts, and everything else beyond anything that had occurred before in American history. This was the radical left idea. Upon the New Deal, however, these people, especially Mencken, did not change their beliefs. They stayed where they were. The New Deal completely destroyed the American political paradigm. This is now considered a radically right-wing, even a libertarian ideal today, something that Mencken himself predates quite substantially. This idea that the government itself is not something to be worshipped, at the very best, as Mencken is describing it, it is a tolerable, if not intolerable, evil that should just constantly be pared down. What happens if you lose this view of the government? What happens if you change this idea? And you find that the answer is you start to just incorporate yourself into the government. You start playing apology for it. You start doing what the government asks you to do. You take contracts and work for them, or what have you. Basically, you surrender any sort of autonomy that you would have had as a political actor. So this is the main lesson that I was trying to put out here with this essay, was that this mindset is not just some myopic Laubert take, is a very common argument used against this. Rather, it's something that actually maintains your autonomy, your ability to maneuver as an independent organization, person, or what have you.
Indeed, and as delightful as this prose is, this essay also very illustrates very well why it is necessary to read Mencken with a grain of salt, shall we say. Mencken's message in this essay could be summarized as trust not in princes. But of course, when we say trust not in princes, the unspoken corollary is trust in God. That is a corollary of which Mencken does not avail himself, and so he resorts to postulating this supposedly Aristotelian government where the government lets the individual alone, and it exposes that simply distrusting government is not enough. You must have a metaphysical worldview in which to ground your principles, otherwise, you dissolve into nihilism and hedonism.
All right. And yeah, speaking from personal experience recently, I can concur 100% that the best government is the one that just leaves you alone and allows you to maintain your autonomy. This is something important for our listeners to keep in mind as we move forward through this tumultuous phase in American political and social life. That the ideal is and always has been, probably not just for Americans, but for people generally. Just leave me alone. You know, not from, like you said, a Lawbert take, but just leave people with their autonomy without sort of arbitrary restrictions on it that aren't serving, a direct and clear interest in, like the administering of justice for criminal offenders and that sort of thing.
Indeed. And
Uh,
Mencken may be the most ill-served man in history by his disciples, because the point he makes here is very important, but to our modern ears, we've been subjected to 50 years of his disciples making it as cringe as humanly possible. So it is important to remember the grain of truth that lies there under.
all right. I'll go ahead and take the next one, which, yeah, we're actually on. So, next essay, More of the Same, written in 1925. Quote, the average man, whatever his errors otherwise, at least sees clearly that government is something lying outside him and outside the generality of his fellow men, that it is a separate, independent, and often hostile power, only partly under his control, and capable of doing him great harm. In his romantic moments, he may think of it as a benevolent father, or even as a sort of jinn or god, but he never thinks of it as part of himself. In time of trouble, he looks to it to perform miracles for his benefit. At other times, he sees it as an enemy with which he must do constant battle. Is it a fact of no significance that robbing the government is everywhere regarded as a crime of less magnitude than robbing an individual or even a corporation? In the United States today, it carries a similar penalty and infinitely less odium than acts that are intrinsically trivial. For example, marrying two wives, both willing.
Hmm.
What lies behind all this, I believe, is a deep sense of the fundamental antagonism between the government and the people it governs. It is apprehended not as a committee of citizens chosen to carry on the communal basis of the whole population, but as a separate and autonomous corporation, mainly devoted to exploiting the population for the benefit of its own members. Robbing it is thus an act almost devoid of infamy, an exploit rather resembling those of Robin Hood and the eminent pirates of tradition. When a private citizen is robbed, a worthy man is deprived of the fruits of his industry and thrift. When the government is robbed, the worst that happens is that certain rogues and loafers have less money to play with than they had before. The notion
Can I
that they
just
had
break
earned,
in here and say
yeah,
it is
yeah.
a delicious irony that in our present day, a new breed of pirates has lately been looting the treasury. So the piratical illusion amuses me immensely.
Yeah, the pirates of preschool, or what were the schools? Whatever. Continuing, when a private citizen is robbed, a worthy man is deprived of the fruits of his industry and thrift. When the government is robbed, the worst that happens is that certain rogues and loafers have a lot less money to play with than they had before. The notion that they had earned that money is never entertained. To the most sensible man, it would have seemed ludicrous. They are simply rascals who, by accidents of law, have a somewhat dubious right to a share in the earnings of their fellow men. When that share is diminished by private enterprise, the business is, on the whole, far more laudable than not. The intelligent man, when he pays taxes, certainly does not believe that he is making a prudent and productive investment of his money. On the contrary, he feels that he is being mulcted in an excessive amount for services that in the main are useless to him and that in substantial part are downright inimical to him. He may be convinced that a police force, say, is necessary for the protection of his life and property, and that an army and navy safeguard him from being reduced to slavery by some foreign Kaiser, but even so, he views these things as extravagantly expensive. He sees it in the most essential of them, an agency for making it easier for the exploiters constituting the government to rob him. In those exploiters themselves, he has no confidence whatever. He sees them as purely predatory and useless. He believes that he gets no more net benefit from their vast and costly operations than he gets from the money he lends to his wife's brother. They constitute a power that stands over him constantly, ever alert for new chances to squeeze him. If they could do so safely, they would strip him to his hide. If they leave him anything at all, it is simply prudentially, as a farmer leaves a hen some of her eggs. This gang is well nigh immune to punishment. Its worst extortions, even when they are baldly for private profit, carry no certain penalties under our laws. Since the first days the Republic, less than a dozen of its members have been impeached, and only a few obscure understrappers have ever been put into prison. The number of men sitting in Atlanta and Leavenworth for revolting against the extortions of the government is always 10 times as great as the number of government officials condemned for oppressing the taxpayers to their own gain. Government today has grown too strong to be safe. There are no longer any citizens in the world, there are only subjects. They work day in and day out for their masters. They are bound to die for their masters at call. Out of this working and dying, they tend to get less and less. On some bright tomorrow, a geological epoch or two hence, they will come to the end of their endurance, and then such newspapers as survive will have a first-page story well worth its black headlines.
Come the revolution.
Yes, well,
Right.
it's hard to. I mean, it's impossible to disagree with anything there. I made allusion to the recent piracy that's in the news lately regarding these daycares or whatever in Minneapolis. I'll just give a rather strange anecdote. So I was watching this YouTube video by a channel that covers speed runs mostly. It's and he also covers like various you could say fraud. He did a video on this individual who was conducting a fraudulent scheme that had to do with partial ownership in collectibles, and there was some cryptocurrency. And I just thought it was strange because some tribes, they conduct as much fraud as they like, and then there's these scandals and they get away with it. But the actual Heritage American tribe, calls itself out whenever this sort of thing happens. In this case, these people aren't, at least one of them is even American. But it's like, I actually thought it was kind of cool. Like, it's actually cool when someone in my tribe managed to screw over the government. And I'm just like, why are we like condemning this, even though it wasn't the government in that case, but I'm kind of stretching the analogy. It's like, yeah, what is my point here? It's just that we're at the point where any view of the government as a thing that helps us is absolutely backwards. It's basically almost entirely inimical to our interests in its current form. There's pretty much no part of the government that I could say, if it were dismantled entirely by a magical like Doge button or something, that would be anything other than an absolute win for us. Anyway, I'll hand it over.
Yeah, I mean that's basically the mindset that I was trying to impart here, and that's going to be the takeaway from most of these articles. Is just what is the mindset or the beliefs that leads him to write this. This is something that we need more of, because if I check like the current state of right-wing thought about the government, the state, or whatever else, there's like this idea that actually there's two ideas, both of which are bad. One is if we just did everything that the left is doing, but we did it like for our people, or we did it with a right-wing paint of coat or something like that, then it would be a utopia. If we had our own community relations service, if we had our own like daycare fraud and whatever else, then all would be well. Of course, this is not the case. This is just outing yourself as a perhaps different tribe of parasite than the other side that is more commonly recognized to be a parasite. The other thing as well is that there's an also strange idea that we can just right all of our problems, solve all of the issues that are facing us. We can completely solve all of society if we just like capture the government itself, and then the government will like snap its fingers, wave a wand, what have you. All of our problems will disappear. I think this is a bastardization of like power analysis that the right wing picked up a little over a half decade ago now. Because it's true, you can stop your enemies with power. You could even be productive with power. That does happen. You can cause benefits to arise as a result of it, but it's not actually going to be a full solution, nor is it going to be good in the long term. This is not me saying that there's like a one ring analogy at play here or anything like that. Rather, it's recognizing what most Americans would, which is keeping this level of societal intervention from a gang of people that benefit off of it and nothing productive is not actually good for a society. It will degenerate it or loot it.
Just to drive the point home, let's just take the sort of number one department that's popular right now on the right, which is the Department of Homeland Security. Would I complain if the Department of Homeland Security was just instantly dissolved tomorrow, despite the fact that ICE is under that department? Thinking about it, no. There's simply no department in the government that I would not want to see salvaged. If we just sort of had a magic wand or like a binary button, it's like you can either say, it's the button, you save DHS or you don't. Actually, just get rid of it too. I mean, I'm not saying like let's devolve into anarchy. We must, erase all departments, but the sentiment being like, oh, we have to protect this particular good part of the government, when the reality is it's basically all bad parts, and you really just want to be minimizing the degree to which the bad parts can affect you, because almost all of it is inimical to your interests, really, in the modern era. I mean, Mencken comments on this, but the degree to which now, about 100 years later, I think might be exactly 100 actually, the degree to which government is now just a waste versus inimical, it's like 90% inimical to us. There's almost nothing that the government does that is not simply neutral. It's absolutely contrary to our interests as a people.
Well, and to your point, since it's so counterintuitive, something to keep in mind is that the largest deportation operation in American history predated the Department of Homeland Security by a half century, give or take. And then beyond that, if you look at everything terrible, evil, or whatever else that happens in society, the instrument that allows it to keep going without people just violently ending it is the government. This is something to keep in mind. The natural order of things is not just sitting around while your elites do what they do, rob you, and engage in who knows what other depraved activities, while letting immense amounts of foreign populations into your neighborhood. The natural order of things is that people would naturally stop that violently, non-violently, who knows. But the reason that they don't have the violent option is because the state prevents them.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. The invasion which has happened would have been impossible absent a government tamping down on the reaction of the populace.
Yeah, exactly. So let's in the interest of time, though, let's continue forward. Who wants to take the next essay?
I'll take the next one. The Politician, from the Institute of Arts and Sciences, 1940. After damning politicians uphill and down dale for many years as rogues and vagabonds and frauds and scoundrels, I sometimes suspect that, like everyone else, I often expect too much of them. Though faith and confidence are surely more or less foreign to my nature, I not infrequently find myself looking to them to be able, diligent, candid, and even honest. Plainly enough, that is too large an order, as anyone must realize who reflects upon the manner in which they reach public office. They seldom, if ever, get there by merit alone, at least in democratic states. Sometimes, to be sure, it happens, but only by a kind of miracle. They are chosen normally for quite different reasons, the chief of which is simply their power to impress and enchant the intellectually underprivileged. It is a talent like any other, and when exercised by a radio crooner or a movie actor or a bishop, it even takes on a certain austere and sorry respectability. But it is obviously not identical with the capacity for the intricate problems of statecraft. Those problems demand for their solution, when they are soluble at all, which is not often, a high degree of technical proficiency, and with it there should go an adamantine kind of integrity, for the temptations of a public official are almost as cruel as those of a glamour girl or a dysomniac. We train a man for facing them, not by locking him up in a monastery and stuffing him with wisdom and virtue, but by turning him loose on the stump. If he is a smart and enterprising fellow, which he usually is, he quickly discovers that hooey pleases the boobs a great deal more than sense. Indeed, he finds that sense really disquiets and alarms them, that it makes them at best intolerably uncomfortable, just as a tight collar makes them uncomfortable, or a speck of dust in the eye, or the thought of hell. The truth, to the overwhelming majority of mankind, is indistinguishable from a headache. After trying a few shots of it on his customers, the larval statesman concludes sadly that it must hurt them, and after that he taps a more humane keg, and in a little while the whole audience is singing "Glory, glory, hallelujah," and when the returns come in, the candidate is on his way to the White House. I hope no one will mistake this brief account of the political process under democracy for exaggeration. It is almost literally true. I do not mean to argue, remember, that all politicians are villains in the sense that a burglar, a child stealer, or a Darwinian are villains. Far from it. Many of them, in their private character, are very charming persons, and I have known plenty that I'd trust with my diamonds, my daughter, or my liberty, if I had any such things. I happen to be acquainted, to some extent, with nearly all the gentlemen, both Democrats and Republicans, who are currently itching for the presidency, including the present incumbent. And I testify freely that they are all pleasant fellows with qualities above rather than below the common. The worst of them is a great deal better company than most generals in the army, or writers of murder mysteries, or astrophysicists, and the best is really superior and a wholly delightful man, full of sound knowledge, competent, prudent, frank, and enterprising, and quite as honest as any American can be without getting slapped into a madhouse. Don't ask me what his name is, for I am not in politics. I can only tell you that he has been in public life a long while and has not been caught yet. But will this prodigy, or any of his rivals, ever unload any appreciable amount of sagacity on the stump? Will any of them venture to tell the plain truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the situation of the country, foreign or domestic? Will any of them refrain from promises that he knows he can't fulfill, that no human being could fulfill? Will any of them utter a word, however obvious, that will alarm and alienate any of the huge packs of morons who now cluster at the public trough, wallowing in the pap that grows thinner and thinner, hoping against hope? Answer? Maybe for a few weeks at the start, maybe before the campaign really begins, maybe behind the door, but not after the issue is fairly joined and the struggle is won in earnest. From that moment on, they will all resort to demagogy, and by the middle of June of election year, the only choice among them will be a choice between amateurs of that science and professionals. They will all promise every man, woman, and child in the country whatever he or she wants. They'll all be roving the land, looking for chances to make the rich poor, to remedy the irredeemable, to succor the unsuccorable, to unscramble the unscramblable, to deflustigate the undeflustigatable. They will all be curing warts by saying words over them and paying off the national debt with money that no one will have to earn. When one of them demonstrates that twice 2 is 5, another will prove that it is 6, 6.5, 10, 20. In brief, they will divest themselves of their character as sensible, candid, and truthful men and simply become candidates for office, bent only on collaring votes. They will all know by then, even supposing that some of them don't know it now, that votes are collared under democracy, not by talking sense, but by talking nonsense, and they will apply themselves to the job with a hearty yo-heave-ho. Most of them, before the uproar is over, will actually convince themselves. The winner will be whoever promises the most with the least probability of delivering anything. Some years ago, I accompanied a candidate for the presidency on his campaign tour. He was, like all such rascals, an amusing fellow, and I came to like him very much. His speeches at the start were full of fire. He was going to save the country from all the stupendous frauds and false pretenses of his rival. Every time that his rival offered to rescue another million of poor fish from the neglects and oversights of God, he howled his derision from the back platform of his train. I noticed at once that these blasts of common sense got very little applause. And after a while, the candidate began to notice it too. Worse, he began to get word from his spies on the train of his rival that the rival was wowing them, panicking them, laying them in the aisles. They flew flowers, hot dogs, and 5-cent cigars at him. In places, there were times where the times were especially hard, they tried to unhook the locomotive from his train, so they'd have to stay with them a while longer and promise them some more. There were no Gallup polls in those innocent days, but the local politicians had their ways of their own for finding out how the cat was jumping. And they began to join my candidate's train in the middle of the night and wake him up to tell him that all was lost, including honor. This had some effect upon him. In truth, an effect almost as powerful as that of sitting in an electric chair. He lost his intelligent manner and became something you could hardly distinguish from an idealist. Instead of mocking, he began to promise, and in a little while he was promising everything that his rival was promising and a good deal more. One night, out in Bible country, after a hullabaloo of the day was over, I went into his private car along with another newspaper reporter, and we sat down to gabble with him. This other reporter, a faithful member of the candidate's own party, began to upbraid him, at first very gently, for letting off so much hokum. What did he mean by making promises that no human being on this earth, and not many of the angels in heaven, could ever hope to carry out? In particular, what was his idea in trying to work off all those preposterous bile beans and snake oils on the poor farmers, a class of men who had been fooled and rooked by every fresh wave of politicians since apostolic times? Did he really believe that the utopia he had begun to so fervently preach would ever come to pass? Did he honestly think that farmers, as a body, would ever see all their rosy dreams come true, or that sharecroppers in the lower ranks would ever come more than a hop, skip, and a jump from starvation? The candidate thought a while, took a long swallow of his coffin varnish he carried with him, and replied that the answer in every case was no. He was well aware, he said, that the plight of the farmers was intrinsically hopeless, and would probably continue so despite doles from the Treasury for centuries to come. He had no notion that anything could be done about it by merely human means, and certainly not by political means. It would take a new Moses and the whole series of miracles. But you forget, Mr. Blank, he concluded sadly, that our agreement in the premises must remain purely personal. You are not a candidate for president of the United States. I am. As we left him, his interlocutor, a gentleman grown gray in Washington, and long ago lost to every decency, pointed the moral of the episode. In politics, he said, man must learn to rise above principle. And then he drove it in with another. When the water reaches the upper deck, he said, follow the rats.
With that, how many people in the modern day have deluded themselves into thinking that there really is an incorruptible and savior-like politician that will save us?
Indeed.
Yeah, that's a bit on the nose, but probably no need to elaborate on that. I think. I was thinking about midway through the essay. We had this excellent stream last week on Pony Express Radio, um, where we had Mr. Jeff Younger on. You may have seen his live stream on Millennial in 2025. I won't elaborate about his background and everything, but one very amusing but very salient point he made in regard to the topic of this essay is that at some point in the state of Texas, he went to on his own accord to a colonel in the Texas National Guard to inquire as to whether or not it would be possible to lay landmines across the entire Texas-Mexico border, what the feasibility and cost of that would be. And the colonel basically revealed that the landmines each cost 75 cents, which is obscenely low, and they could lay something like 10 miles worth of minefield in an hour or something like that. Basically, within a couple of days, they could have the entire southern border mined with extremely cheap mines that are already on hand, and this is totally possible. And the GOP politicians in Texas, and probably all politicians, were absolutely freaked by this suggestion, because the thing is, it was eminently feasible in terms of actually solving a problem, which therefore meant it absolutely could not possibly be done, because these politicians, of course, are not elected in the state of Texas to actually solve problems specifically from one party, the GOP, but they are elected to get elected and to perform their role in the political machine. It's beyond a shadow of a doubt they're not actually there to solve a problem, right? Because and there were numerous examples of this, but that one was particularly amusing, and the sort of thing that demonstrates that in reality, if these politicians had any real intent to fulfill their promises, then in that particular case, that it could simply be done. It's chosen not to. There are cases where, as stated above, in the conclusion, that impossible things are promised, but also even when possible things are promised, then those don't happen either, even though they could be done.
I used to think that this was sort of like folk wisdom in the negative sense. You come across a lot of rural Americans that have exactly the view that Mencken outlines here of politicians. And so I sort of just discarded it ever so slightly, because I thought you could maybe nuance it a little. There might be a more realistic analysis. Maybe something could be done with politicians or what have you. But I think that any real and serious movement going into the future needs to understand and internalize this understanding of the politicians. This is not like some comedic analysis that Mencken is giving here, though it does have comedy within it, but this is very much true. They do not actually exist to solve problems, they exist to get elected. Very common populist talking point, but what that actually translates into is that even your very radical ideas can be picked up by these people, or even the next group of people, to come after them when that group disappoints you. And they can leave you in the dust, just like they will leave the farmers in the dust, maybe after a few token concessions. Maybe like they'll leave various different minority groups and cities in the dust after a few concessions. Or like the Heritage American in the middle of the country, they too can leave you in the dust after a few concessions. So you are not immune to this trend just because you have edgy politics.
Indeed.
Yes,
I do wonder. No, go ahead, Charlie.
Go ahead. Okay,
No,
well, even the aforementioned, primary political figure of our era, that being, of course, the President of the United States, has promised in all three of his campaigns all number of extraordinary things, which for basically the entire part are not accomplished. Most of them, not even in the slightest. And the thing is, if the president had the intent to actually solve these problems, you can consider any number of ways, such as what was outlined by Mr. Younger there, how they could actually be solved. But the fact that these things are not done means that the degree to which those problems are actually solved is merely, as you say, Ryan, one of those concessions, but it's not going to actually fix your problem. At the most, even in regard to immigration, let's say, the current president's election is really only just forestalling the continued worsening of that problem, apparently, until it inevitably does get worse, because ultimately the government is not going to allow that problem to be solved. And real solutions to the problem basically require the getting out of the way of that very government.
Indeed, and for the right specifically, it is particularly disheartening to see the level of vitriol which one attracts by insisting publicly that the promises be kept.
I think that's
Indeed.
a killer point to leave that
Yeah.
and move on.
Well, how unfortunate that I have one more. I speculate that the unnamed candidate that Mencken is talking about here was running against Williams Jennings Bryan.
I was wondering if it was in fact McKinley,
Yeah.
or maybe even any of the challengers to Bryan.
Yeah.
I think in a couple of weeks I might have included Bryan, or I might have left him out. I think is probably what I did, because he is in actuality not the most important historical figure, but it is funny to read Mencken on Bryan. So this next one is very short. It's called Governmental Theories. 1922, so almost 2 decades before this last one that we just read. And it reads, in every age, the advocates of the dominant political theory seek to give it dignity by identifying it with whatever contemporaneous desire of man happens to be most powerful. In the days of monarchy, monarchy was depicted as the defender of the faith. In our present era of democracy, democracy is depicted as the only safe guardian of liberty. And the communism or super-communism of tomorrow, I suppose, will be sold to the bourgeoisie as the only true palladium of peace, justice, and plenty. All of these attempts to hook up cause and effect are nonsensical. Monarchy was fundamentally not a defender of the faith at all, but a rival and enemy to the faith. Democracy does not promote liberty. It diminishes and destroys liberty. And communism, as the example of Russia already shows, is not a fountain that gushes peace, justice, and plenty, but a sewer in which they are drowned. And similar theme, I purely included this because I think that there's a lot of very romantic depictions, even amongst people who are otherwise very realistic in their analysis of what forms of government are best, or what their character is, or anything else. But this is I think especially any medieval scholar would agree that even most monarchies were not the most upstanding and pious individuals. A minority were. I think that they're sainted, almost all of them, but even then that's a very tiny minority of the ruling class under the monarchy. Democracy and communism.
One particular English defender of the faith comes to mind.
Democracy and communism, I don't think we really need to explicate. But similarly, and I would like to keep beating this horse. You listening to this on the enlightened right wing that has lived through all of this and has heard these talking points are also not immune from doing this. So this is I think people tend to buy a lot of very nice propagandical rhetoric that if we got our way, then everything in society would be fixed. And whatever justification socially we need for it, whatever our version of defending the faith is, that would be accomplished. But in actuality, the people that usually end up leading these things are not your saviors in that regard. So
It's not on the
I can
schedule, but can we just read Note on a Cuff?
yes.
Sure, yeah.
So
It was very funny.
Yes, the saddest life is that of a political aspirant under democracy. His failure is ignominious, and his success is disgraceful.
Yeah, that last part is particularly incisive, I think. When these people do get elected, they end up just making a disgrace of themselves, or
Yeah,
not
I mean,
even elected. I mean, you can be a political aspirant under democracy without necessarily running for office. There are all sorts of even non-governmental roles that people can play within this field.
yeah, I have a personal anecdote about this. A very good friend of my family, his wife went to my mother's Bible study. We were very closely connected, and we believed them to be, just the best of all possible people. And he was a state rep for a long time, and then he got elected to Congress, and then he climbed to the pinnacle of Congress. He wasn't Speaker of the House, but he was a member of the leadership, and just couldn't have sold out harder. It was mind-boggling to see. I don't know what they got or what they had, but just the utter disillusionment that followed upon his turning of coat was unbelievable.
Yes, having recently run up against government myself, it's quite astounding the sheer level of disgrace, corruption, malintent, unimpressiveness that occupies the government. And sometimes we impress these illusions upon ourselves that they're I mean, I guess again, particularly in regard to the president of the United States, that there's some like mythical great madness embodied within a political figure or something like that. But unfortunately, it's just like this across the board. Even in cases where you get a slightly more preferable version of the corrupt politician, you're always dealing with the same disgraceful type of person, and they're simply not there, elected in office or appointed or otherwise, to actually fix things for you. They're not. They're just not working for you. And if you actually if you have any real significant interaction with government at any level, this will be instantly revealed to you.
Hmm.
All
I
right.
can take
Well,
the
I
next one as
suppose.
well, since it was so brief, the one that I just read.
Sure.
Yeah. So this is a whole section after government itself on democracy, of which I think we have only a few from this chapter 9 of his Christomathy. This one is called "Its Origins," published in the year 1926. And he says, "What we now call democracy came into the Western world to the tune of sweet, soft music. There was, at the start, no harsh bawling from below. There was only a dulcet twittering from above. Democratic man thus began as an ideal being, full of ineffable virtues and romantic wrongs. In brief, as Rousseau's noble savage, in smock and jerkin, brought out of the tropical wilds to shame the lords and masters of the civilized lands. This fact continues to have important consequences to this day. It remains impossible, as it was in the 18th century, to separate the democratic idea from the theory that there is a mystical merit, an esoteric and ineradicable rectitude in the man at the bottom of the scale. That inferiority by some strange magic becomes a sort of superiority, nay, the superiority of superiorities. Everywhere on earth, save where the enlightenment of the modern age is confessedly an intransient eclipse, the movement is toward the completer and more enamored enfranchisement of the lower orders. Down there, one hears, lies a deep, illimitable reservoir of righteousness and wisdom, unpolluted by the corruption of privilege. What baffles statesmen is to be solved by the people instantly and by a sort of seraphic intuition. Their yearnings are pure. They alone are capable of a perfect patriotism. In them is the only hope of peace and happiness on this lugubrious ball. The cure for the evils of democracy is more democracy. This notion, as I hint, originated in the poetic fancy of gentlemen on the upper levels, sentimentalists who, observing to their distress that the ass was overladen, proposed to reform transport by putting him into the cart. A stale Christian bilge ran through their veins. They were the direct ancestors of the more saccharine liberals of today, who yet mouth their tattered phrases and dream their preposterous dreams. I can find no record that these phrases, in the beginning, made much impression upon the actual objects of their rhetoric. Early democratic man seems to have given little thought to the democratic ideal and less veneration. What he wanted was something concrete and highly materialistic. More to eat, less work, higher wages, lower taxes. He had no apparent belief in the achromatic virtue of his own class, and certainly none in its capacity to rule. His aim was not to exterminate the baron, but simply to bring the baron back to a proper discharge of baronial business. When by the wild shooting that naturally accompanies all mob movements, the former end was accidentally accomplished, as in France, and men out of the mob began to take on baronial airs, the mob itself quickly showed its opinion of them by butchering them deliberately and in earnest. Once the pikes were out, indeed, it was a great deal more dangerous to be a tribune of the people than to be an ornament of the old order. The more copiously the blood gushed, the nearer that old order came to resurrection. The Paris proletariat, having been misled into killing the king in 1793, devoted the next 2 years to killing those who had misled it, and by the middle of 1796 it had another king in fact, and in 3 years more he was king de jure, with an attendant head of barons, counts, marquises, and dukes, some of them new, but most of them old to guard, symbolize and execute his sovereignty. And he and they were immensely popular, so popular that half of France leaped to suicide that their glory might blind the world. Meanwhile, of course, there has been a certain seeping down of democratic theory from the metaphysicians to the mob, obscured by the uproar but still going on. Rhetoric, like a stealthy plague, was doing its immemorial work. Where men were confronted by the harsh, exigent realities of battle and pillage, as they were everywhere on the continent, it got into their veins only slowly. But where they had time to listen to oratory, as in England, and above all in America, it fetched them more quickly. Eventually, as the world grew exhausted and the wars passed, it began to make its effects felt everywhere. Democratic man, contemplating himself, was suddenly warmed by the spectacle. His condition had plainly improved. Once a slave, he was now only a serf. Once condemned to silence, he was now free to criticize his masters, and even to flout them, and the ordinances of God with them. As he gained skill and fluency at that somber and fascinating art, he began to heave and wonder of at his own merit. He was not only, it appeared, free to praise and damn, challenge and remonstrate, he was also gifted with a peculiar rectitude of thought and will, and a high talent for ideas, particularly on the political plane. So his wishes and his mind began to take on the dignity of legal rights, and by the same token, the wishes of his masters sank to the level of mere ignominious lusts. By 1828 in America, and by 1848 in Europe, the doctrine had arisen that all moral excellence, and with it all pure and unfettered sagacity, resided in the inferior 4/5 of mankind. In 1867, a philosopher out of the ghetto pushed that doctrine to its logical conclusion. He taught that the superior minority had no virtues at all, and hence no rights at all, that the world belonged exclusively and absolutely to those who hewed its wood and drew its water. In half a century, he had more followers in the world, open and covert, than any other sophist since apostolic times. Since then, to be sure, there has been a considerable recession from that extreme position. The dictatorship of the proletariat, tried here and there, has turned out to be, if I may venture a prejudiced judgment, somewhat impracticable. Even the most advanced liberals, observing the thing in being, have been moved to cough sadly behind their hands. But it would certainly be going beyond the facts to say that the underlying democratic dogma has been abandoned or even appreciably overhauled. To the contrary, it is now more prosperous than ever before. The war of 1914 through 18 was fought in its name, and it was embraced with loud hosannas by all the defeated nations. Everywhere in Christendom it is now official, save in a few benighted lands where God is temporarily asleep. Everywhere its fundamental axioms are accepted. A, that the great masses of men have an inalienable right, born of the very nature of things, to govern themselves, and B, that they are competent to do it. Are they occasionally detected in gross and lamentable imbecilities? Then it is only because they are misinformed by those who would exploit them. The remedy is more education. Are they, at times, seen to be a trifle naughty, even swinish? Then it is only a natural reaction against the oppressions they suffer. The remedy is to deliver them. The central aim of all the Christian governments of today, in theory, if not in fact, is to further their liberation, to augment their power, to drive ever larger and larger pipes into the great reservoir of their natural wisdom. That government is called good, which responds most quickly and accurately to their desire and ideas. That is called bad, which conditions their omnipotence and puts a question mark after their omniscience.
Mm.
So this is a extreme anti-populism from the American side of things, roughly contemporaneous with the Italians, I suppose, but with I think much more practical aspects to it. This is not a fancy political theory, but it's a self-evident truth. Quite obviously, he doesn't cite anyone. He doesn't give any deep analysis of parties or what have you. He doesn't delve into psychology. He just points out what we all know, which is that if you try to ask the great majority of people out there, and even in our own country, you're likely to get something absolutely idiotic as an answer.
It's interesting that populism has been elevated to this it's in the good things category, like mainly because it has an association with Donald Trump and various other so-called populist leaders in Europe, particularly, about a decade ago. And it's now just associated that populism is good, just because of that association. I mean, when you really think about it, the bar here is so unbelievably low that it beggars belief. When you really look at the last elections, right, Donald Trump is preferable to Hillary Clinton, for example, not because the fruits of populism have produced the best possible leader for the country, but because Clinton was effectively, like, literally hellspawn, like literally from the mouth of Satan. And then you have the exact same. It's remarkably little difference with Joe Biden, and then the woman they were going to replace him with, and I suppose had effectively replaced him with. The bar is absurdly low. So if we're going to say populism is good because it's preferable to literal hellspawn, it's like surely we could do better than that.
Indeed. And
just in
Mencken,
terms of things, yeah.
Mencken, of course, gave us the explanation for this phenomenon in the second essay. The population is highly receptive to flattering hooey, and populism is flattering hooey to the populace. I'm in the population, so I must be wise.
The other thing, which I think most people won't actually want to admit, even in our spheres, is that the inferior 4/5 of the population are in fact inferior in things that matter in terms of running a government, a country, competently administering it, keeping a society together, what have you. Of course, if you look at the very first essay we read, he pokes holes into alternatives, which we're about to get into in a couple of articles. But this one is, I think it's clear he finds to be the most absurd, this democratic ideal, and with good reason. It's just, what if we appeal to the lowest common denominator and see if we get the best from them? Will the lowest common denominator select their best compatriots? No.
You know, there's this strange idea that I see promulgated a lot, that it is really important to utilize rhetoric that appeals to sort of, we'll say, normie sort of normie conservative, Republicans, etc., whatever, Donald Trump supporters, when you're speaking, which has created this sort of mythical category. I hear a lot of commentators talk about this sort of mythical category of, I guess, what you might call like centrist normie. I wrote an essay on this a couple of maybe almost a year ago, on the new normal, and then I wrote a follow-up with the new normal, mostly focusing on the rise in political violence, assassinations in particular. And there is another side of this coin, and I mean the main thing is, if you actually engage with normal people, quote unquote, they either have like completely stupid ideas in terms of what actually should be done in government, or they're just completely insane and deranged. There's this weird idea that some of the as Mr. Quinn mentioned earlier, the sort of insistence that Donald Trump, for example, actually keep his promises, which may involve, what may be seen as radical action. There's this sort of sense that this is going too far, is like this distasteful to normal people and unpopular and doesn't win elections. When, in my experience, and I know others have this experience as well, what we call normies, they're absolutely crazy. I mean, you think that like the radicals or something are on, right-wing Twitter or whatever. I assure you they are not. Like, normies have absolutely it's weird. Like, people talk about this idea that you don't want to spurg out, right? You don't want to say like crazy stuff in front of normies because you don't want to like freak them out or reveal your power level. It's like, dude, the normies are nuts right now. They've been driven totally nuts by on purpose, as I wrote in these articles, by at least, I'm sure they were like that already to some extent, but they are now absolutely nuts. There's really very little you can say to them that's going to freak them out, because more than likely, and I know a lot of cases where this has happened, they will say crazy stuff to you first, basically entirely unprompted, like the lights of which you would regard as like Fed posting. So anyway, getting off of my soapbox a bit, there's this whole idea of populism and like what it actually is, I mean, that is what it is. It's like government by crazy. I suppose it's my turn to read now. So a glance ahead, is that what we're actually on? Yes, that one is selected. So I will read a glance ahead from the same. Okay, so when was the last one printed? The last one was printed 1926. So this is also 1926. Once again, exactly 100 years ago. A glance ahead. Quote, "For all I know, democracy may be a self-limiting disease, as civilization itself seems to be. There are thumping paradoxes in its philosophy, and some of them have a suicidal smack. It offers John Doe a means to rise above his place beside Richard Roe, and that by making Roe his equal, it takes away the chief usufructs of the rising. I here attempt no pretty logical gymnastics. The history of democratic states is a history of disingenuous efforts to get rid of the second half of that dilemma. There is not only the natural yearning of Doe to use and enjoy the superiority that he has won, there is also the natural tendency of Roe as an inferior man to acknowledge it, Democracy, in fact, is always inventing class distinctions despite its theoretical abhorrence of them. The Baron has departed, but in his place stand the Grand Goblin, the supreme worthy Archon, the sovereign Grand Commander. Democratic man is quite unable to think of himself as a free individual. He must belong to a group, or shake with fear and loneliness, and the group, of course, must have its leaders. It would be hard to find a country in which such brummagem serene highnesses are revered with more passionate devotion than they get in the United States. The distinction that goes with mere office runs far ahead of the distinction that goes with actual achievement. A Harding is regarded as superior to a Halstead, no doubt because his doings are better understood. There is a form of human striving that is understood by democratic man even better than Harding's, and that is the striving for money. Thus, the plutocracy in a democratic state tends inevitably, despite its theoretical infamy, to take the place of the missing aristocracy, and even to be mistaken for it. It is, of course, something quite different. It lacks all the essential characters of a true aristocracy: a clean tradition, culture, public spirit, honesty, honor, courage, and above all, courage. It stands under no bound of obligation to the state. It has no public duty. It is transient and lacks a goal. Its most puissant dignitaries of today came out of the mob only yesterday, and from the mob they bring all its peculiar ignobilities. As practically encountered, the plutocracy stands quite as far from the honnête homme as it stands from the holy saints. Its main character is its incurable timorousness. It is forever grasping at straws held up by demagogues. Half a dozen gabby Jewish youths meeting in a back room to plan a revolution. In other words, half a dozen kittens preparing to upset the Matterhorn are enough to scare it half to death. Its dreams are of banshees, hobgoblins, bugaboos. The honest, untroubled snores of a Percy or Hohenstaufen are quite beyond it. The plutocracy is comprehensible to the mob because its aspirations are essentially those of inferior men. It is not by accident that Christianity, a mob religion, paves heaven with gold and precious stones, i.e., with money. There are, of course, reactions against this ignoble ideal of men of more civilized tastes, even in democratic states, and sometimes they arouse the mob to transient distrust of certain of the plutocratic pretensions, but that distrust seldom arises above mere envy, and the polemic which engenders it is seldom sound in logic or impeccable in motive. What it lacks is aristocratic disinterestedness, born of aristocratic security. There is no body of opinion behind it that is, in the strictest sense, a free opinion. Its chief exponents, by some divine irony, are pedagogues of one sort or another, which is to say, men chiefly marked by their haunting fear of losing their jobs. Living under such terrors, with the plutocracy policing them harshly on one side and the mob congenitally suspicious of them on the other, it is no wonder that their revolt usually peters out in metaphysics, and that they tend to abandon it as their families grow up and the costs of heresy become prohibitive. The pedagogue in the long run shows the virtues of the congressman, the newspaper editorial writer, or the butler, but not those of the aristocrat. When by any chance he persists in contumacy beyond 30, it is only too commonly a sign not that he is heroic, but simply that he is pathological. So with most of his brethren of the utopian fife and drum corps, whether they issue out his own seminary or out of the wilderness, they are fanatics, not statesmen. Thus politics under democracy resolves itself into impossible alternatives. Whatever the label on the parties or the war cries issuing from the demagogues who lead them, the practical choice is between the plutocracy on one side and a rabble of preposterous impossibilists on the other. It is a pity that this is so, for what democracy needs most of all is a party that will separate the good that is in it theoretically from the evils that beset it practically, and then try and erect that good into a workable system. What it needs beyond everything is a party of liberty. It produces, true enough, occasional libertarians, just as despotism produces occasional regicides. It will never have a party of them until it but it treats them in the same drumhead way. It will never have a party of them until it invents and installs a genuine aristocracy to breed them and secure them. Well, yes, some of the last bits there were a bit. Where were they? Yes, this part right here.
Right.
When
So
by
this
any
is-
chance he persists in contumacy beyond 30, it is only too contumately a sign that not that he is heroic, but simply that he is pathological. Oof.
Oof, Will Stansel BTFO'd. And it's an interesting point he makes about the sympathy between the plutocrat and the lower orders stemming from their identical impulses, this confusion of wealth with nobility that is preyed upon there.
Right. And something else that I was like the whole point of this, I suppose, is that a lot of people really attack right wingers, commenters, and whoever else, saying that we can't use the democratic process because it's just mechanically against fixing any of our problems. But I think that this was a more concise and stronger of an overview as to why that is. There is not any person who can arise within this democratic system and continue with the views that you would need to fix it at all. It's not that no one's tried it before or they just didn't try hard enough or whatever else. If they had just like secretly put away their views and publicly campaigned on a different kind of rhetoric and then came out whenever they got the office into something else, as if this hasn't been tried before either. Rather, what it is that we just are not allowed to have because of this. I say allowed, it's not even that. We cannot naturally cultivate a group of people that can work within the system to actually fix any of the issues we're facing. You have to be outside of the system somehow. That was the main takeaway that I was wanting to sort of press from this essay, is that it's not just like a trite right-wing, like secretly lazy saying you can't work within the system. It's not that the people saying that are necessarily lazy. They don't want to win is another common another common insult pressed against those people. It's not that. What it is just that you cannot overcome this system, even secretly. If you got a secret group of people that all believed what we believed into this, got them a majority and whatever else, they're still going to be just swamped by the system. You'd actually have to destroy it to get what we want.
Yes, but of course that would entail a revolution, wouldn't it? Which rarely ever gets you what you want, at least according to Mencken.
Yeah, right. And he gets accused of being a nihilist. I don't think that's entirely true. Clearly he believes in something. If you read there's an essay in here on criticism, the art of criticism. By his own admission, he believes in something. That's why he criticizes so hard, is because he wants to elevate some other view. I think that you can sort of point out, though, without becoming a nihilist or someone who just hates everyone or an eternal critic or whatnot, that none of these things are cure-alls. However, you can point out that some of these methods are definitely going to fail. So far, if you take what he said at face value, the only method of political change that could possibly result in a better form of government is the revolution that he so decried in that first essay. Everything else he's just completely written off. He does, however, leave that a revolution could, by accident, give you something better. So that was something to some sort of comparison there.
A happy accident.
Practicably speaking, it's certainly the case that now, much more than say 10 years ago, many people have sort of bought fully into democracy as the means by which, basically the country is saved. Heritage Americans save their country, which Mencken would clearly strongly and vociferously argue against. Now, practically, there's going to be certainly some intersection with that. For it's impossible to do anything significant in this country whatsoever without some sort of interface with political mechanisms. They're so completely all-consuming and totalitarian now that you're inevitably going to run up against that. If you are, I mean, the main motivation in interacting with them is really just to get them out of your way. But unfortunately, we find that, broadly speaking, Americans are in a highly politicized mode right now, where no matter what side people are on, they're viewing democracy as the means by which everything is going to be fixed. When Mencken would argue, and I think it's been quite clearly borne out, that is absolutely not going to be the case.
All right, I suppose it is my turn. Rivals to Democracy, from Notes on Democracy, 1926. This is page 164. The mob has its flatterers and boshmongers. The king has his courtiers. But there is a difference, and I think it's an important one. The courtier, at his worst, at least performs his genuflections before one who is theoretically his superior and is surely not less than his equal. He does not have to abase himself before swine with whom he would ordinarily disdain to have any traffic. He is not compelled to pretend that he is a worse man than he really is. He needn't hold his nose in order to approach his benefactor. Thus, he may go into office without having dealt his honor a fatal wound, and once he is in, he is under no pressure to sacrifice it further, and he may nurse it back to health and vigor. His sovereign, at worst, has a certain respect for it, and hesitates to strain it unduly. The mob has no sensitiveness on that point, and indeed has no knowledge it even exists. The courtier's sovereign, in other words, is apt to be a man of honor himself. When, in 1848 or thereabout, Wilhelm I of Prussia was offered the imperial crown by a so-called parliament of his subjects, he refused it, on the ground that he could only take it from his equals, i.e., from the sovereign princes of the Reich. To Democrats of the world, this attitude was puzzling, and on reflection, it began to seem contemptible and offensive. That was not to be marveled at. To a Democrat, any attitude based upon a concept of honor, dignity, and integrity seems contemptible and offensive. The Democratic politician, facing such plain facts, tries to save his armor proper in a characteristically human way. That is to say, he denies them. We all do that. We convert our degradations into renunciations, our self-seeking into public spirit, and our swinishness into heroism. No man, I suppose, ever admits to himself candidly that he gets his living in a dishonorable way, not even a biter off of puppies' tails. The Democratic politician, confronted by the dishonesty and stupidity of his master, the mob, tries to convince himself and all the rest of us that it is really full of rectitude and wisdom. This is the origin of the doctrine that, whatever its transient errors, democracy always comes to right decisions in the long run. Perhaps, but on what evidence, by what reasoning, and for what motives? Go examine the long history of the anti-slavery agitation in America. It is a truly magnificent record of bunkum, false pretenses, and imbecility. This notion that the mob is wise, I fear, is not to be taken seriously. It was invented by mob masters to save their faces. Whenever democracy, by an accident, produces a genuine statesman, he is found to be proceeding on the assumption that it is not true, and on the assumption that it is difficult, if not impossible, to go to the mob for support and still retain the ordinary decencies. The best democratic statesmanship, like the best non-democratic statesmanship, tends to safeguard the honor of the higher officers of state by relieving them of that degrading necessity. As every schoolboy knows, such was the intent of the fathers, as they expressed in Article 2, Sections 1 and 2 of the Constitution. To this day, it is a common device when this or that office becomes steeped in intolerable corruption, to take it out of the gift of the mob and make it appointive. The aspirant, of course, still has to seek it, for under democracy it is very rare that the office seeks the man, but the seeking of it in the president or even of the governor of a state is felt to be appreciably less humiliating and debasing than seeking it from the mob. The president may be a Coolidge, and the governor may be a Blasey or a Ma Ferguson, but he or she is at least able to understand plain English and need not be put into good humor by the arts of the circus clown or Baptist evangelist. To sum up, the essential objection to feudalism, the perfect antithesis to democracy, was that it imposed degrading acts and attitudes upon the vassal. The essential objection to democracy is that, with few exceptions, it imposes degrading acts and attitudes upon the men responsible for the welfare and dignity of the state. The former was compelled to do homage by his suzerain, who was very apt to be a brute and an ignoramus. The latter are compelled to do homage to their constituents, who in overwhelming majority are certain to be both.
So here, and this is why I think it's important, I think there's a danger in reading these essays where he criticizes something and then coming away thinking Mencken's goal in this essay was to completely refute this idea, or if he's positive about something, then the takeaway is that it's Mencken really wants this idea in totality. He has poked a lot of holes in monarchy, at least from his view, throughout these essays. But you see he has a respect for it, because the categories that he is looking at politics through is not necessarily just the systems of government, but like the actual functions and consequences of them. He does have a certain respect for this aristocratic or monarchical system of governance, because it does not completely debase the people in them and subject them to people who, in Mencken's view, are in basically every way inferior to people who should be administering them or governing them.
Yes, the democratic politician, to save his own sense of self, must tell the lie that the mob is wise, because otherwise he is degraded.
Right. And this isn't just a relationship between mob leader and mob that Mencken talks about. This happens with any base for a politician, as we've learned. These are not necessarily the wider mob, but specifically their bases. This is very clear to anyone on the right. If you look at the left, people are beholden to tell the most insane and psychopathic radicals on the left that they are entirely correct and that they'll try to one-up them in policy in order to get their position, office, or nomination. But for whatever reason, we drop that analysis when it gets to us, as if we don't also have this catering towards us that never actually seems to materialize, actually. So something to consider. There might be an alternative somewhere. With that, I can start our next article, Last Words.
You always have to have the last words.
Oh, no one was speaking up. This is also from 1926, where Mencken writes, "One of the merits of democracy is quite obvious. It is perhaps the most charming form of government ever devised by man. The reason is not far to seek. It is based upon propositions that are palpably not true, and what is not true, as everyone knows, is always immensely more fascinating and satisfying to the vast majority of men than what is true. Truth has a harshness that alarms them, and an air of finality that collides with their incurable romanticism. They turn, in all the great emergencies of life, to the ancient promises, transparently false, but immensely comforting. And of all those ancient promises, there is none more comforting than the one to the effect that the lowly shall inherit the earth. It is at the bottom of the dominant religious system of the modern world, and it is at the bottom of the dominant political system. Democracy gives it a certain appearance of objective and demonstrable truth. The mob man, functioning as citizen, gets a feeling that he is really more important to the world, that he is genuinely running things. Out of his maudlin herding after rogues and mountebanks, there comes to him a sense of vast and mysterious power, which is what makes archbishops, police sergeants, and other such magnificos happy. And out of it, there comes too a conviction that he is somehow wise, that his views are taken seriously by his betters, which is what makes United States senators, fortune tellers, and young intellectuals happy. Finally, there comes out of it a glowing consciousness of a high duty triumphantly done, which is what makes hangmen and husbands happy. All these forms of happiness are, of course, illusory. They don't last. The Democrat, leaping into the air to flap his wings and praise God, is forever coming down with a thump. The seeds of his disaster lie in his own stupidity. He can never get rid of the naive delusion, so beautifully Christian, that happiness is something to be got by taking it away from the other fellow. But there are seeds, too, in the very nature of things. A promise, after all, is only a promise even when it is supported by divine revelation, and the chances against its fulfillment may be put into a depressing mathematical formula. Here, the irony that lies under all human aspiration shows itself. The quest for happiness, as usual, brings only unhappiness in the end. But saying that is merely saying that the true charm of democracy is not for the Democrat, but for the spectator. That spectator, it seems to me, is favored with a show of the first cut and caliber. Try to imagine anything more heroically absurd. What grotesque false pretenses. What a parade of obvious imbecilities. What a welter of fraud. But is fraud unamusing? Then I retire forthwith as a psychologist. The fraud of democracy, I contend, is more amusing than any other, more amusing even and by miles than the fraud of religion. Go into your praying chamber and give sober thought to any of the more characteristic democratic inventions, or to any of the typical democratic prophets. If you don't come out paled and palsied by mirth, then you will not laugh on the last day itself, when Presbyterians step out of the grave like chicks from the egg, and wings blossom from their scapulae, and they leap into interstellar space with roars of joy. I have spoken hitherto of the possibility that democracy may be a self-limiting disease, like measles. It is, perhaps, something more. It is a self-devouring. One cannot observe it objectively without being impressed by its curious distrust of itself, its apparently ineradicable tendency to abandon its whole philosophy at the first sign of strain. I need not point to what happens invariably in democratic states when the national safety is menaced. All the great tribunes of democracy on such occasions convert themselves, by a process as simple as taking a deep breath, into despots of an almost fabulous ferocity. Nor is this process confined to times of alarm and terror. It is going on day in and day out. Democracy always seems bent upon killing the thing it theoretically loves. All its axioms resolve themselves into thundering paradoxes, many amounting to downright contradictions in terms. The mob is competent to rule the rest of us, but it must be rigorously policed itself. There is a government, not of men, but of laws. But men are set upon benches to decide finally what the law is and may be. The highest function of the citizen is to serve the state. But the first assumption that meets him when he essays to discharge it is an assumption of his disingenuousness and dishonor. Is that assumption commonly sound? Then the farce only grows the more glorious. I confess for my part that it greatly delights me. I enjoy democracy immensely. It is incomparably idiotic and hence incomparably amusing. Does it exalt dunderheads, cowards, trimmers, frauds, cads? Then the pain of seeing them go up is balanced and obliterated by the joy of seeing them come down. Is it inordinately wasteful, extravagant, dishonest? Then so is every other form of government. All alike are enemies to decent men. Is rascality at the very heart of it? Well, we have borne that rascality since 1776 and continue to survive. In the long run, it may turn out that rascality is an ineradicable necessity to human government, and even to civilization itself. that civilization, at bottom, is nothing but a colossal swindle. I do not know. I report only on when the suckers are running well, the spectacle. Sorry, I report only that when the suckers are running well, the spectacle is infinitely exhilarating. But I am, it may be, a somewhat malicious man. My sympathies, when it comes to suckers, tend to be coy. What I can't make out is how any man can believe in democracy who feels for and with them, and is pained when they are debauched and made a show of. How can any man be a Democrat who is sincerely a Democrat?
Hmm.
Yes, so I wish that we had this level of maliciousness, perhaps, towards people in this process. That is, it's not enough to just recognize that this is all wrong, it's bad, or whatever else. If you just recognize that something is wrong, false, or what have you, you can eventually make peace with it if that's as far as it goes. But the actual maliciousness towards it upon realizing that, I think, is what would actually save someone from being, say, co-opted or deluding themselves into going along with it.
You know, reading this article in 2026, it's terrifying now that democracy really is self-consciously a show. Thomas 777 frequently makes the point that politics is treated as entertainment by people, and not in the ironic sense that Mencken uses, but literally it becomes a soap opera that they wrap themselves up in and get emotionally invested in and are thereby pacified.
Right. Yeah. I mean, ironically, what Mencken is describing here, because it is true, means it can be politically weaponized, as you say. I find that maybe that is a very good reason not to publicly broadcast truths in a mass democracy.
Yes,
So-
truths are certainly not popular. Okay. Well, we're at 90 minutes now, so we should definitely finish up. That is okay. We have time for the last two. We have capitalism. So what was the section this is in? I just looked at it.
Capitalism is page
Economics.
294.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. So it's just in the economics section. So we have an essay here on capitalism. This one all the way in 1935. So now we're in the Second World War period. Of course, what year did the Great Depression start?
29. Yeah. So this is in the
well
this
into
is
the
in
Great
the
Depression.
yeah, this is in the barren wasteland of the New Deal, where everyone was completely discrediting the system that he's writing on.
Capitalism, quote, all the quacks and coney catchers now crowding the public trough at Washington seem to be agreed upon one thing, and one thing only. It is the doctrine that the capitalist system is on its last legs, and will presently give place to something nobler and more scientific. There is, of course, no truth in this doctrine whatsoever. It collides at every point with the known facts. There is not the slightest reason for believing that capitalism is in collapse, or that anything proposed by the current wizards would be anything better. The most that may be said is that the capitalistic system is undergoing changes, some of them painful, but those changes will probably strengthen it quite as often as they weaken it. We owe to it almost everything that passes under the general name of civilization today. The extraordinary progress of the world since the Middle Ages has not been due to the mere expenditure of human energy, nor even to the flights of human genius, for men had worked hard since the remotest times, and some of them had been of surpassing intellect. No, it has been due to the accumulation of capital. That accumulation permitted labor to be organized economically and on a large scale, and thus greatly enhanced its productiveness. It provided the machinery that gradually diminished human drudgery and liberated the spirit of the worker, who had formerly been almost indistinguishable from a mule. Most of all, it made possible a longer and better preparation for work, so that every art and handicraft generally widened its scope and range, and multitudes of new and highly complicated crafts came in. We owe to capital the fact that the medical profession, for example, is now really useful to mankind, where formerly it was only useful to the charlatans who practiced it. It took accumulated money to provide the long training that medicine began to demand, as it slowly lifted itself from the level of a sorry trade to that of a dignified art and science. Money to keep the student while he studied, and his teachers while they instructed him, and more money to pay for the expensive housing and materials that they needed. In the main, all that money came from private capitalists. But whether it came from private capitalists or from the common treasury, it was always capital, which is to say, it was always part of an accumulated surplus. It never could have been provided out of the hand-to-mouth income of a non-capitalistic society. When the Bolsheviki, a game of frauds almost comparable to our own brain trust, took over the control of affairs in Russia, they had to throw overboard at once one of the cardinal interests of their ostensible creed. That article was to the effect that all of the sorrows of the world were due to the fact that the working man under capitalism had lost ownership of his tools. All the classical authorities on socialism, from Marx and Engels downward, had stressed this loss heavily, and the utopia they visioned was always one in which the working man should get his tools back, and became an independent producer, working for himself alone, and giving none of the value he created to a wicked capitalist. But the moment the Bolsheviki came into power, they had to shelve all this, and since then nothing has been heard about it save from their American gulls. A shrewd set of shysters, eager only to run Russia as their private preserve, they saw instantly that their main job was to accumulate capital, for without it half of their victims would starve. The old capital of the country had been destroyed by war. An easy way to get more would have been to borrow it, but no one would lend, so the Bolsheviki had to accumulate fresh capital of their own. This they managed to do by sweating the Russian workers in a manner never before seen on Earth, at all events in modern times. The workers at the start resisted, especially the farmers, and in consequence Russia had a couple of famines, and the hat had to be passed in the capitalistic countries to feed the starving. But by slaughtering the rebellious farmers and organizing the jobless into a huge army, the Bolsheviki presently managed to bring the workers of Russia to heel, and since then, those poor fish have been worked like prisoners in a chain gang, and have got pretty much the same wages. All the produce of their labor, all and above subsistence, were more suitable to rats than to men, has gone into the coffers of the Bolsheviki. Thereby, the Bolsheviki have accumulated a store of new capital, and now they use it not only to build ever larger and larger factories, each manned by hordes of workers who own nothing but their hands, but also to provide luxurious quarters for themselves, including an embassy in Washington so gaudy that it is the envy of every banker in the town. Thus, one of the fundamental principles of Marxism has been reduced to absurdity in the house of its professed disciples. They may be scoundrels, and no doubt they are, but they have a considerable cunning, and are thus well aware that nothing properly describable as modern civilization can be carried on without capital. And by capital, I mean precisely what they mean when they denounce it for foreign consumption. That is, I mean a surplus accumulated not in the pockets of workers, but in the pockets of persons who provide them with the means to work, and not under control of those who produce it, but under the control of those who have managed to collar it. The shabby politicians, puerile pedagogues, and briefless lawyers who have raged and roared at Washington since 1933 would go the same way if they had the chance. Some of them, perhaps, are actually stupid enough to believe that the world could get along without capitalism, but others surely must be shrewd enough to note what has happened in Russia. But whether they are only plain idiots or clever rogues, they all talk grandly about capitalism's decay, and even those who allege that they are trying to save it keep on mouthing the nonsense that it is on its deathbed. You will find the same hollow blah in all the organs of the more abundant life, and every day it issues from some dotty pedagogue yearning for a government job. There is no sense in it whatsoever. The modern world could no more get along without accumulated capital than it could get along without police or paved streets. The greatest change imaginable is simply the change that has occurred in Russia, a transfer of capital from private owners to professional politicians. If you think this would do the individual any good, then all you need to do is be undeceived. All you need to do to be undeceived is to ask any American letter carrier. He works for a master capitalist named Uncle Sam, and he will gladly tell you how hard he has to sweat for every nickel that he gets.
So this is a very sort of practical counter argument to a lot of economic platforms that are also popular in our own spheres. Almost everything that he speaks out about, except for the explicitly Marxist attacks on capitalism, you can find on the online right today, which increasingly resembles more and more like a New Deal era brain trust than anything else. None of the things in here that Mencken cites is economic doctrine or any sort of a priori knowledge, which people tend to put less stock in for some reason. He's not citing any great economists or writers or any data. He's just looking very much at the practical reality of dissolving capital ownership and providing it to someone else. So this is I thought it would be good to hear an American on this who is not an economist, sort of counter what I think is a growing segment of the online right's economic ideas. It's a very strange shift over the last few years.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say on that one. I mean, it speaks fairly plainly for itself. I recall we reviewed the search for order earlier in the lifespan of the stream, and one of the main points of that book is that the advancement of the American state more from its prior form into what we recognize now primarily occurred because capital started accumulating for the first time in the East. It wasn't merely that the coastal aristocrats were rich, but that massive surpluses of capital had accumulated that the government could then spend for the first time in American history. And that is what allowed all of these systems to change. So certainly his point about the accumulation of capital and what it did to this country are true.
Certainly. And he's also describing here fundamentally the replacement of the entrepreneur with the manager. When he talks about the post office worker working hard for his wages, even though he works for a public entity, what's changed is who's directing the investment. You have these managers now in control of these institutions rather than entrepreneurs doing it. And it is foolish to hope, as we've learned over the last century, that this will yield a better result.
Right, and he also does make a social point that I think is very much worth internalizing as well. He points out that this capital accumulation from this old system of entrepreneurs and what else, what not else, is very much responsible for what you could actually call progress, growth, civilization, or any of this other stuff. This detaching of man's destiny from just the pure and brutal forces of nature. It's something to keep in mind. The only group that I still see talking about it like this idea that saving capital, productivity, and whatnot else in their own system naturally are civilizing, are actually the libertarians. Most other groups seem to have this idea that capital and money comes from political involvement and just extracting natural resources and refining them. And the more that you do those things politically and economically together, the more wealthy you are, and the better your geography is, the more magically better your civilization is as well. So it's something to keep in mind that there is actually an active choice here of whether to consume or to save, and that this is very important to civilization itself.
Essential.
Yeah, right.
All right, shall I close it out with the malevolent job holder?
Please. Hold on, people are saying that we don't have sound. Is the stream still alive? Are we still going? Yeah, can anyone be heard? Because people are still saying sound. Fantastic. All of us. I can hear Ryan. It's good now. Stream good. All right.
Okay. That is odd. All right, starting over. This is from the American Mercury, June 1924. Mencken prefaces the article itself with a little note. This was written long before the New Deal afflicted the country with a great mass of new administrative law and a huge horde of new and extra-tyrannical job holders. I am more than ever convinced that it embodied a good idea. Beginning the article itself, in the immoral monarchies of the continent of Europe, now happily abolished by God's will, there was in the old days of sin an intelligent and effective way of dealing with delinquent officials. Not only were they subject, when taken in downright corruption, to the ordinary processes of the criminal laws, in addition, they were liable to prosecution in special courts for such offenses as were peculiar to their offices. In this business, the abominable Prussian state, though founded by Satan, took the lead. It had maintained a tribunal in Berlin that devoted itself wholly to the trial of officials accused of malfeasance, corruption, tyranny, and incompetence, and any citizen was free to lodge a complaint with the learned judges. The trial was public and in accord with the rules fixed by law. An official found guilty could be punished summarily in a dozen different ways. He could be reprimanded, reduced in rank, suspended from office for a definite period, transferred to a less desirable job, removed from the rolls altogether, fined, or sent to jail. If he was removed from office, he could be deprived of his right to a pension in addition, or fined or jailed in addition. He could be made to pay damages to any citizen he had injured, or to apologize publicly. All this, remember, was in addition to his liability under the ordinary law, and the statutes specifically provided that he could be punished twice for the same offense, once in the ordinary courts and once in the administrative court. Thus, a Prussian official who assaulted a citizen, invaded his house without a warrant, or seized his property without process of law, could be deprived of his office and fined heavily by the administrative court, sent to jail by an ordinary court, and forced to pay damages to a victim by either or both. Had a Prussian judge, in those far-off days of despotism, overcome by a brainstorm of Kaiserliche passion, done any of the high-handed and irrational things that our own judges, federal and state, do almost every day, an aggrieved citizen could have him haled before the administrative court and recovered heavy damages from him, besides enjoying the felicity of seeing him transferred to some dismal swamp in East Prussia to listen all day to the unintelligible perjury of anthropoid Poles. The law specifically provided that responsible officials should be punished not more leniently than subordinate or ordinary offenders, but more severely. If a corrupt policeman got 6 months, a corrupt chief of police got 2 years. More, these statutes were enforced with Prussian barbarity, and the jails were constantly full of errant officials. I do not propose, of course, that such medieval laws be set up in the United States. We have indeed gone far enough in imitating the Prussians already. If we go much further, the moral and enlightened nations of the world will have to unite in a crusade to put us down. As a matter of fact, the Prussian scheme would probably prove ineffective in the Republic, if only because it involved setting up one gang of job holders to judge and punish another gang. It worked very well in Prussia before the country was civilized by force of arms because, as everyone knows, a Prussian official was trained in ferocity from infancy and regarded every man arraigned before him, whether a fellow official or not, as guilty ipso facto. In fact, any thought of a prisoner's possible innocence was abhorrent to him as a reflection upon the Polizei and an inference upon the throne, the whole monarchical idea, and God. But in America, even if they had no other sentiment in common, which would be rarely, judge and prisoner would both often be fellow Democrat or fellow Republicans, and hence jointly interested in protecting their party against scandal and its members against the loss of their jobs. Moreover, the Prussian system had another plain defect. The punishments it provided were, in the main, platitudinous and banal. They lacked dramatic quality, and they lacked ingenuity and appropriateness. To punish a judge taken in judicial crim con by fining him or sending him to jail is a bit too facile and obvious. What is needed is a system A, that does not depend for its execution upon the goodwill of fellow job holders, and B, that provides swift, certain, and unpedantic punishments, each fitted neatly to its crime. I announce, without further ado, that such a system, after due prayer, I have devised. It is simple, it is unhackneyed, and I believe that it would work. It is divided into two halves. The first half takes the detection and punishment of crimes of job holders away from the courts of impeachment, congressional smelling committees, and all other such existing agencies, i.e., away from the other job holders, and vests it in the whole body of free citizens, male and female. The second half provides that any member of that body, having looked into the acts of a job holder and found him delinquent, may punish him instantly and on the spot and in any manner that seems appropriate and convenient. That, in case this punishment involves physical damage to the job holder, the ensuing inquiry by the grand jury or coroner shall confine itself strictly to the question of whether the job holder deserved what he got. In other words, I propose that it shall no longer be malum in se for a citizen to pummel, cowhide, kick, gouge, cut, wound, bruise, maim, burn, club, bastinado, flay, or even lynch a job holder, and then it shall be malum prohibitum only to the extent that the punishment exceeds the job holder's deserts. The amount of this excess, if any, may be determined very conveniently by a petite jury, as other questions of guilt are now determined. The flogged judge or congressman or other job holder, on being discharged from hospital, or his chief heir in case he has perished, goes before a grand jury and makes complaint, and if a true bill is found, a petite jury is impaneled and all the evidence is put before it. If it decides that the job holder deserves the punishment inflicted upon him, the citizen who inflicted it is acquitted with honor. If, on the contrary, it decides that this punishment was excessive, then the citizen is adjudged guilty of assault, mayhem, murder, whatever else it is, in a degree apportioned to the difference between what the job holder deserved and what he got, and that punishment for that excess follows in the usual course. The advantages of this plan, I believe, are too patent to need argument. At one stroke, it removes all the legal impediments which now make the punishment of a recreant job holder so hopeless a process, and enormously widens the range of possible penalties. They are now stiff and in large measure illogical. Under the system I propose, they could be made to fit the crime precisely. Say a citizen today becomes convinced that a certain judge is a jackass, that his legal learning is defective, his sense of justice atrophied, and his conduct of cases before him tyrannical and against decency. As things stand, it is impossible to do anything about it. A judge cannot be impeached on the mere ground that he is a jackass. The process is far too costly and cumbersome, and there are too many judges liable to the charge. Nor is anything to be gained by denouncing him publicly and urging all good citizens to vote against him when he comes up for re-election, for his term may run for 10 or 15 years, and even if it expires tomorrow and he is defeated, the chances are good that his successor will be quite as bad, and maybe even worse. Moreover, if he is a federal judge, he never comes up for re-election at all, for once he has been appointed by the President of the United States on the advice of his more influential clients and with the consent of their agents in the Senate, he is safe until he is so far gone in senility that he is to be propped up on the bench with pillows. Now, imagine any citizen free to approach him in open court and pull his nose, or even in aggravated cases, to cut off his ears and throw him out of the window, or knock him in the head with an axe? How vastly more attentive would he be to his duties? How diligently would he apply himself to the study of the law? How careful would he be about the rights of litigants before him? How polite and even suave he would become. For judges, like all the rest of us, are vain fellows. They do not enjoy having their noses pulled. The ignominy resident in the operation would not be abated by the subsequent trial of the puller, even if he should be convicted and jailed. The fact would still be brilliantly remembered that at least one citizen had deemed the judge sufficiently a malefactor to punish him publicly and risk going to jail for it. A dozen such episodes, and even the career of any judge would be ruined and his heart broken, even though the jails bulged with his critics. He could not maintain his air of aloof dignity on the bench. Even his catchpoles would snicker at him behind their hands, especially if he showed a cauliflower ear or a black eye or a scar over his bald head. Moreover, soon or late, some citizen who had had him would be acquitted by a petite jury, and then, obviously, he would have to retire. It might be provided by law that he should be compelled to retire in that case, and acquittal would automatically vacate the office of the offending job holder.
So I just have to ask, like, do any of you have such utter contempt for the people that rule over you as to suggest a system like this in perpetuity? Could you create
a modest
this
proposal?
Yeah, like, have you internalized the way that things are to just generate this and publish it in a newspaper off the cuff?
Seems that we must all work on cultivating our hate.
Needed in some places.
Indeed.
So that's all we have on the docket for today.
And a fine docket it was.
Is Charlemagne still with us?
Charlie, are you there?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, so that's all we got for today. Actually, wrapping up right around the 2-hour mark, which is the max window we set for.
But we're not done yet.
We're not. Do we? Wait, do we have
super
another?
chats.
Oh,
yeah, quite a few.
I was gonna forget the super chats. So let me check Entropy real quick. We have Jeff Brostar 666 for $3. Hello, man.
Hello.
Yes, hello. Hello, $3. Thank you. And then YouTube. I will have to scroll up in the chat. Let's see what we got here. We got, for $19.99, find better narration on YouTube, I dare you, from Paul Lunsford 8921. Yes, of course, referring to Mr. Quinn's narration. Indeed, I don't think you really can find better narration on YouTube. So thank you for the support.
I'm certain he is referring to your dulcet tones, Charlie.
Yeah, I don't think so. Porkins 1802 for £5. That actually came in when you were talking, I'm sure of it. For £5. Thank you for your Lovecraftian narration. It is indefatigably eloquent and consummately colloquial. Kudos.
Thank you very much, Porkins.
And then we're getting money from all over the Anglosphere tonight. We've got Don Browning sends us the 10 Australian dollars with a hippopotamus doing an uppercut, and it says KO, like Street Fighter or something. So
we
thank
do
you
it
very
all
much.
for Don Browning.
Absolutely.
Yes,
So
thank you all for the donations.
Indeed. That's a pretty good haul. We definitely appreciate it for the work we're doing here. And yeah, so we got more Mencken up next time. Let's see, what's the next Mencken category? His historical essays. We've actually got 2 weeks of historical essays. So hopefully you like Mencken, because there's significantly more of it incoming. Thank you, Ryan and Mr. Quinn, for hosting with me as usual. And with that, we'll go ahead and say goodbye.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.